Today, I want to talk about how we can restore mental clarity through nutrition. Welcome to Fly to Freedom, the Anorexia Recovery Podcast. This podcast is for you if you're living in a restrictive eating disorder or supporting somebody else. I'm Julia Trehane, your host, an eating disorder recovery coach. And I lived in 40 years of anorexia, orthorexia, and exercise addiction before my recovery journey led me to complete freedom. Wherever you are in your recovery journey, this podcast is for you to help you grow and heal. Let's get on with the episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. As always, I'm so grateful that you're here today, and whether you've been following this journey for a while or you're joining us for the first time, this is a safe space for your recovery. And let's look at restoring mental clarity through nutrition. This is an incredibly important topic because when we restrict our food intake, whether it's from anorexia, orthorexia, or any other form of eating disorder, our minds suffer just as much as our bodies. That mental fog, the inability to make decisions, and the emotional chaos that comes from restriction can feel so heavy. It's like there's a constant cloud hanging over everything, making even the simplest tasks feel overwhelming. But the good news is this fog does lift, and it all starts by nourishing your body properly. So today we're going to talk about why that fog happens in the first place. It's quite a sciencey episode. What exactly goes on in your brain during restriction and recovery? How increasing your food intake can rebuild trust with your body? And most importantly, how to restore that mental clarity through proper nutrition. So let's get started, because one of the most noticeable symptoms when you're in the midst of an eating disorder is that mental fog. Feeling like you're walking through a haze, a cloud, and everything is hazy. Making decisions feels really difficult, and sometimes even basic tasks like deciding what to wear or even remembering why you've walked into a room become overwhelming. I used to actually completely lose a conversation partway through. Somebody could be talking to me, or I could be talking, and I could be halfway through a sentence and then it was gone. Or I could be having this conversation and then I realized that the person I was talking to, or who was talking to me, was looking at me, waiting for a response. And I realized that I didn't have a clue what they'd said. It was like I was present, but not present. I was there, but there was nobody home. And this all comes down to how restriction affects your brain. The brain is a high energy demanding organ, and it consumes about 20% of your daily energy intake, mainly in the form of glucose, which your body gets from carbohydrates. So when you restrict food, especially carbs, and carbs were on my big no-no list, I restricted carbs as much as I possibly could. And it meant that my brain simply wasn't getting the fuel it needed to function properly. Without enough glucose, the neurons in your brain cannot communicate effectively, and that leads to that sluggish, foggy feeling. There's also the impact on neurotransmitters, which are the chemical messengers that regulate mood, focus, and decision-making. So when you restrict food, your brain struggles to produce these neurotransmitters, which leads to increased anxiety, depression, and irritability. And let's not forget about the hormonal imbalances. Restricting food triggers a stress response in your body, increasing levels of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And chronically high cortisol levels contribute to mental fatigue, anxiety, and that massive sense of just feeling so overwhelmed. And this adds up to like a perfect storm of brain fog, indecision, and emotional chaos. And you may find that your memory is just barely there that you have to write everything down. So what happens exactly in the brain during restriction? When you restrict food, several critical things happen in the brain. Glucose deprivation, because glucose is the brain's primary fuel source, and without it, your brain's ability to function starts to break down. It's like trying to run your phone on a 1% battery. The result is slower thinking, difficulty processing information, and that constant sense of mental exhaustion. Your neurotransmitter production drops. Your brain relies on nutrients to produce neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. When those nutrients aren't available, your brain can't produce enough of these chemicals. This leads to the increased anxiety, depression, and lack of motivation we all feel. And it's why you might feel like your emotions are completely out of control, or why things that once brought you joy can feel flat or overwhelming. The hormonal imbalance, because restriction throws your hormones way out of balance, particularly cortisol, which spikes when your body perceives a state of stress or starvation. And these elevated cortisol levels impair cognitive function, especially the memory and the ability to think clearly, which honestly, I just had nothing. I used to joke that I was like a goldfish with a 3-second memory. There are also changes in brain structure. Prolonged restriction actually leads to physical changes in the brain. There are studies that have happened that show that malnutrition caused the brain's gray matter, which is the part responsible for muscle control, memory, and sensory perception, to shrink. So this not only affects your cognitive abilities, but has a huge impact on your emotional regulation. So how does your body and brain respond to nutritional rehabilitation? This is where things actually start to get quite hopeful, because as scary as the brain fog and cognitive decline feel, they are not permanent. When you start nourishing your body, amazing things can happen in your brain. The first thing that happens when you start eating more, especially when you reintroduce carbohydrates, is that your body and your brain gets the glucose it's been craving. With this fuel restored, your neurons can begin firing properly again. Decision-making, memory, and focus all start to improve. You might not notice it straight away, but slowly, over time, that mental fog starts to lift. With adequate nutrition, especially healthy fats, proteins, and key vitamins like B vitamins and omega-3s, which we can get from our food, your brain starts producing neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine again. And this supports better mood regulation. It reduces your anxiety and starts to bring back those feelings of pleasure and motivation, which over time helps you feel more connected to the world around you and less stuck in that emotional loop of anxiety and hopelessness. As you eat more regularly, your cortisol levels begin to normalize. Your body no longer feels like it's in a constant state of stress. And as your cortisol decreases, your overall sense of calm and clarity increase. And you'll find your blood sugar levels stabilize, which helps with emotional regulation and reduces those highs and lows that come from energy dips. I just want to take a moment to share something I think will make your day just a little bit brighter. If you're someone who's looking for a simple way to infuse your mornings with a little more positivity and love, I've got something special for you. I'm thrilled to introduce my daily love emails, a little dose of encouragement and inspiration delivered right to your inbox every single morning. They're designed to set the tone for your day with mantras, affirmations, and gentle reminders to help you start your day with intention and love. Whether you're feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or just need a little pick-me-up, these emails will give you the gentle nudge you need to move forward with clarity and purpose. And as a bonus, every week you'll get an exclusive sneak peek of my upcoming podcast episode, plus extra resources to help you on your journey. So if you're ready to start each day on a positive note, head to the link in the show notes and sign up for my daily love emails. It's completely free, and I can't wait to be a part of your morning routine. Click the link, sign up, and let's make every day a little bit brighter together. Perhaps one of the most fascinating parts of nutritional rehabilitation is that your brain can actually begin to heal itself physically. That grey matter that shrank during restriction can regenerate with proper nutrition. And the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain responsible for memory and learning, can also repair itself. This structural recovery is why people often describe feeling like they've come back to life during a recovery, because it's not actually just a metaphor. Your brain is literally coming back online. At this point, I do have to say, and I'm not trying to scaremonger, but if you continue to restrict and not pursue recovery, the effects on the brain and the rest of the body can be severe and long-lasting. While the body can adapt to a certain extent, prolonged restriction will lead to significantly and potentially irreversible damage to the brain. Here's what happens over time if you don't choose recovery. One of the most serious effects of long-term restriction is the shrinking of the brain's grey matter, which consists of the neurons responsible for many vital functions, including muscle control, memory, emotions, decision-making, and sensory perception. Prolonged malnutrition can cause parts of the brain, especially the hippocampus, which governs memory and learning, to shrink. And this shrinkage is sometimes irreversible, depending on the duration and severity of the restriction. A smaller brain mass is linked to cognitive impairment and memory loss. Over time, that chronic malnutrition leads to worsening cognitive impairment. The mental fog you feel during restriction, that difficulty concentrating, forgetting things, the trouble making decision, can worsen to the point of serious cognitive dysfunction. Your problem-solving skills can decrease, your attention span diminishes, and learning new information becomes more difficult. Your ability to make sound judgments and decisions can be severely impacted. As restriction continues, the brain's ability to produce and regulate neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine diminishes even further. This leads to chronic mood instability, which increases the risk of anxiety disorders and depression. This is sadly why so many people in an eating disorder turn to suicide. People who continue to restrict are much more likely to experience long-term chronic depression, anxiety, mood swings, and it severely impacts your quality of life. The areas of the brain that help regulate emotions, which is the prefrontal cortex, are deeply affected by malnutrition. This means that the emotional regulation becomes increasingly difficult the longer you're in restriction, which leads to heightened irritability, emotional outbursts, and inability to cope with day-to-day stresses. And these emotional extremes cause significant issues in relationships and social functioning, which further isolates you and makes you feel like you're on your own. Memory is one of the first cognitive functions that's affected by malnutrition and restriction. Over time, this becomes more pronounced, with more frequent lapses in short and long-term memory. What starts as a temporary issue can become a chronic condition, especially if the brain damage has occurred due to prolonged malnutrition. This can affect your ability to remember tasks, conversations, or even basic daily routines. As the brain becomes more and more deprived, behaviors associated with anxiety, OCD, and perfectionism can intensify. And the restrictive eating amplifies these behaviors as the brain becomes fixated on controlling food, exercise, or weight. This obsessive control becomes harder to break free from, trapping somebody in a cycle of these disordered behaviors. In some cases, extreme malnutrition can lead to electrolyte imbalances that cause seizures. The lack of nutrients, particularly sodium, potassium, and calcium, can lead to electrical disturbances in the brain, resulting in life-threatening seizures. This is especially dangerous for people with severe anorexia or those who have been restricting for a long time. It also negatively impacts intelligence, as chronic malnutrition leads to reduced cognitive function, and this can manifest as a decrease in IQ and overall intellectual ability. While this might not be noticeable short-term, long-term, it erodes your cognitive skills. It also increases the risk of cardiovascular issues, including stroke. Starvation weakens your heart, reduces blood pressure, and can cause arterial issues, increasing the risk of a stroke. The stroke in turn can result in significant brain damage, leading to further loss of cognitive function, speech, and motor skills. Over time, the cognitive and physical effects of long-term restriction make it difficult to actually live independently. Your basic daily functions like managing your finances, personal hygiene, and keeping up with daily tasks become too overwhelming, and your memory and judgment may become too impaired for someone to work or make sound decisions. And there is, of course, an increased risk of death. Malnutrition severely affects the brain's ability to regulate the autonomic nervous system, which controls your functions like breathing, heart rate, and temperature regulation. As your brain weakens, so does its ability to maintain basic life-sustaining processes, leading to a high risk of sudden death. This is one of the reasons why anorexia has one of the highest mortality rates of any mental illness. So choosing recovery is not just about improving your quality of life. It's actually about saving your life. Without proper nutrition, your brain cannot function optimally, and over time, the damage becomes increasingly difficult to reverse. By restoring nourishment, your brain has a chance to heal. Cognitive function can improve. Emotional regulation becomes more stable, and overall health is restored. I know recovery can feel overwhelming, and you might take this as, well, I've been in it so long now, there's no point, the damage is done. But that's not true. There is always improvements to make, and your life can always get better. I was in it for 40 years, and my life is night and day compared to what it was. And recovery is the path that leads to reclaiming your mind, body, and life. It's a process of healing the brain as much as it is healing the body. And with proper nutrition, support, coaching, therapy, your brain can return to a place of clarity, stability, and wellness. The brain's reduced functioning from malnutrition and restriction does actually play a huge role, a major role, in creating that extreme fear of weight gain, which is one of the biggest symptoms of many eating disorders, especially anorexia. This fear is deeply influenced by the way the brain and body react to starvation, malnutrition, and restriction, affecting cognitive, emotional, and hormonal process. So how does our brain dysfunction lead to this extreme fear of weight gain? Because you weren't born that way. You weren't born being terrified of weight gain. And yes, while you may say, isn't everybody afraid of weight gain? It's not the same kind of fear. Most people who do not live in a restrictive eating disorder may not want to gain weight, but they don't take themselves into this physical and mental hell in order to avoid doing so. They may say things like, oh, I shouldn't have that, I'm being good. And then they have it anyway. Whereas somebody in an eating disorder, the fear is extreme and it stops us actually living our lives. It's not just words. It's not just a slight feeling of discomfort. So how does this come about? There's overactivity in the amygdala, which is our fear center. It's the part of the brain responsible for processing fear and anxiety. In someone with an eating disorder, studies have shown that the amygdala becomes hyperactive, particularly when exposed to food-related stimuli or the idea of weight gain. And this heightened fear response is exacerbated by malnutrition. When the brain is deprived of nutrients, it goes into this state of heightened stress, perceiving weight gain or food as a threat that must be avoided at all costs. This undernourished brain is in survival mode, so the fear of weight gain is biologically rooted in this altered state. The brain is basically mistakenly associating weight gain with a loss of control or danger, although in reality, weight restoration is necessary for health. The malnutrition disrupts the balance of neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA, which play a significant role in mood regulation, reward, and anxiety. Low serotonin levels in particular are linked to increased anxiety and obsessive thoughts, including the obsession with body image and weight. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward, is also impaired, making the idea of gaining weight feel threatening or punishing instead of neutral or even positive. This imbalance amplifies the feelings of fear and anxiety around weight gain, making it seem like a real danger, even when rationally you may know it's not. The constant preoccupation with food, body size, and control is fueled by this neurotransmitter dysfunction. And the reduced functioning during restriction does actually distort the way you can perceive your own body. The malnourishment affects the visual and sensory centers of the brain, which leads to body dysmorphia. And you can often see yourself as larger or heavier than you are in reality. This distorted perception feeds into the intense fear of weight gain, because even tiny changes in body size can be perceived as major or catastrophic. It makes it difficult for you to process information rationally, which means you may struggle to understand that weight gain is necessary for recovery and health. And instead, you're more likely to focus obsessively on the idea that weight gain is negative, which magnifies the fear. Restricting food alters the reward systems, particularly how dopamine is released in response to food. Over time, eating becomes less rewarding, while weight loss or the avoidance of food becomes associated with feelings of achievement or control, which creates a reinforcing cycle where restricting food or losing weight feels like a win, and the idea of gaining weight feels like a loss or a failure. The more you restrict, the stronger this false sense of control becomes. Gaining weight then threatens that perceived control, which increases, of course, the fear and anxiety that surrounds it. And when your brain is undernourished, it goes into survival mode. And your body's priority is to conserve energy and protect against starvation. And as part of this response, the brain can become fixated on maintaining control over food and weight. The fear of weight gain becomes a way to maintain a sense of safety or predictability in a chaotic internal world. So even though weight gain is necessary for survival, the brain in starvation mode paradoxically views it as a threat to control, which leads to extreme fear, which is all why to start recovery, to start nutritional rehabilitation, you have to do it scared. And as you begin to nourish your body and brain properly during recovery, many of these fear-based responses begin to shift. Your brain's functioning improves, neurotransmitter levels normalize, and the distorted perceptions around food and body image start to ease. One of the first changes that happens is a reduction in the hyperactivity of the amygdala. It calms down as the brain receives adequate nutrition, and it comes out of survival mode and is no longer in this constant state of heightened fear and stress. Over time, your brain stops perceiving food or weight gain as a direct threat, and that fear response begins to diminish. So with proper nourishment and psychological support, that overwhelming anxiety about food and weight gain becomes more manageable. What once felt terrifying starts to feel okay, like you can cope with it. And as your body is consistently fed with nutrient-dense food, the production of key neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA improves. The serotonin helps to regulate your mood and anxiety, making it easier to manage the fears and obsessive thoughts. Dopamine begins to function normally again, making food and nourishment feel rewarding instead of punishing. And these changes contribute to a more balanced emotional state, reducing that compulsive, extreme fear of weight gain. And then you start to get the return of cognitive clarity. As your brain receives enough energy and nutrients, that mental fog starts to lift and rational thinking can return. This allows you to challenge the irrational fears around weight gain and begin to see that gaining weight is actually necessary for health and well-being. And recovery also helps restores the brain's ability to process information accurately, which makes it easier to see your body as it truly is, rather than through the distorted lens of body dysmorphia. It makes it possible to understand that weight gain is a part of recovery, and it's good, not something to be feared. As the brain heals, the association between restriction and reward starts to weaken. Instead of feeling this accomplishment, this feeling of winning from restriction, your brain starts to experience pleasure from nourishing itself. Your brain's reward systems normalize, and it makes it easier to enjoy food and see it as fuel rather than a threat. I used to never think that I would ever enjoy food. I was one of these people that said, if I could just take a pill and that meet all my nutritional needs and never have to eat again, I would do that. And I was adamant in that. I'd never felt that I'd enjoyed food in my life. And actually, I do really enjoy food. And I look forward to certain meals. And I don't know if I have favorite foods, but I have foods that I really love. And going out for a meal with family or friends can be a really, really enjoyable, social, loving, celebratory thing to do. Whereas before it was something to be feared and calculated, and it was a nightmare. And all these things that I never believed were possible came true. They are all possible. So your relationship with food and your body can heal as your brain receives constant nutrition. Your hunger and fullness cues can become reliable. I mean, I never thought I would ever feel hungry. But I do. I get hunger cues now and fullness cues. When your body is no longer in a state of deprivation, that can happen to you too. And over time, your trust in your body grows, and that fear of weight gain, it just simply loses its power. And you can start to see your body as a friend, as something that you love, rather than something to be controlled or feared. Your body allows you to have this human experience. So that extreme fear of weight gain is largely a result of the actual malnutrition's impact on your brain, because it's affecting your neurotransmitter levels, emotional regulation, cognitive function, and reward systems. When you start recovery and your brain receives the nourishment it needs, these dysfunctions begin to heal. And that fear of weight gain really diminishes as your brain's fear responses calm down, your neurotransmitter balance is restored, and rational thinking returns. Ultimately, recovery helps restore a healthier, more balanced relationship with food, your body, and your weight. What once felt terrifying, gaining weight, becomes part of your journey towards freedom, health, self-love, and a life free from fear. And as your brain begins to heal, something equally important is also happening. You start to rebuild trust with your body. For so long, you might have viewed your body as the enemy. You might not trust your hunger signals or feared food as something to be controlled. But as you start to nourish yourself, you realize your body is not actually working against you. It's not punishing you. It's trying to protect you and has been all along. And now, as you are giving it the energy it needs, it responds with more clarity, more stability, and more ease. But this process of rebuilding trust is gradual. It's not like flipping a switch and suddenly feeling okay. It's about being consistent. This is like one of the most important words in recovery. Taking consistent steps towards nourishing yourself and allowing your body to show you that it can be trusted. So let's look at what foods are great to focus on during this stage of recovery. So all foods have a place in recovery, and there are no good or bad foods, but there are foods that can help support your brain and your body to heal more effectively. So carbohydrates, so important, and so many of us restrict them. But these are your brain's main energy source, and they are absolutely essential in recovery. You might look at, as I did, all these studies that say that our brains can work on fat, but it's so much harder. And when you are trying to heal your brain, you want to give it the best, the easiest things for it to use. And so carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates, give your brain that immediate boost of glucose to start functioning clearly again. You don't need to focus on all the whole grains and the vegetables and stuff like that in recovery. Your brain and body need simple foods that you can get energy from quickly for your body to start to heal. So fats as well. Fats can be found in all sorts of foods. You've got avocados, nuts, seeds, fish. You've got dairy, you've got cheeses. There's fats in so many foods, and they are critical for your brain health because they help repair the cell membranes that are involved in the neurotransmitter production, which supports the better mood regulation and the cognitive function. Protein-rich foods also really help repair tissues and muscles, but they play a huge role in producing neurotransmitters, and your brain needs these building blocks to function properly. So try and have a variety of foods. Personally, I advise my clients to limit the amount of fruits and vegetables they have because these are filler foods and they're really hard for your body to digest. But instead, actually having the more processed foods, the simple carbohydrates, the sugars, the fats, so that you can really give your body the energy it needs as quickly as possible. And you want to aim for really regular eating, ideally 3 meals and 3 snacks, to try and keep your energy levels stable, support your brain in healing, and start to show your brain and your body that they can trust you and that the famine is over and that food is plentiful. Now, the next big question, which so many people ask, is either how much is enough or what if I eat too much? And it's normal to need more food than you think you do. Your body is actually in a catch-up mood, and you might you may experience extreme hunger at times, and this can be physical hunger or it can be mental hunger. If you're thinking about food, you're hungry, because our bodies need energy to give us physical hunger signals. And so in the eating disorder, when we're not giving them the energy, they cut back on everything they can that needs energy. It's like, I suppose, sending a letter as opposed to sending an email. A letter, you've got to write it out, you've got to get the pen, you've got to get the paper, put it in the envelope, find a stamp, put an address on, take it to the letterbox, the post box, then it's got to be transported, And it's a whole big thing, and it takes a lot of energy to do it. But an email just pings there immediately. And that's like your thoughts. So if you are thinking about food, you're hungry, and that is your body's way of telling you to eat. Even when you've not got the physical hunger signals, even when those thoughts of food are fear thoughts, you're still thinking of food and you are hungry. So it is normal to have more food than you think you need. There is no too much, honestly, because you have this great big energy debt that needs to be paid back. So you cannot eat too much. The more you eat, the quicker you heal. And it is so important to eat regularly and to try and make sure that you have carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. I really wouldn't bother calorie counting because that can just be triggering, and your body will guide you. And over time, your hunger cues will start to normalize. Journaling can be a really, really powerful tool to help you process your thoughts and your emotions, because all that stuff that's spinning around in your head and makes the fear seem bigger, and your brain's giving you all these excuses because it's in this fear response, and all the stuff we talked about earlier in this podcast. If you can take it out of your head and put it on paper, you can realize that you are not your thoughts. You are the thinker of your thoughts. And you can get some form of perspective by putting it on paper and stepping back and reading it. So I've got a few journal prompts that can help you here. What fears are coming up around eating more or eating certain foods? And where do I think these fears have come from? What does the idea of trusting my body feel like to me? And what might help me build that trust over time? And it's really important to check in with our bodies. So how does my body feel right now? What needs have I got coming up, and how can I meet them? Oh, I clearly have a need to have some lunch because my stomach is now rumbling. So as soon as I finish recording this episode, that will be what I'm doing. Mantras are another fantastic tool which help you stay grounded. And if you want help with mantras, honestly, sign up to my Daily Love emails and you'll get a new mantra every day that is designed to help you through recovery. But here's a few that you can use when things feel hard. Is my body knows what it needs and I'm learning to trust her. I am worthy of nourishment and care. I am healing one bite at a time. Food is not just fuel, but it's medicine for my body and mind. It's helping me heal. As you continue to nourish your body, you'll notice that the mental fog starts to lift. Decision-making becomes easier. Honestly, the difference is incredible. Your thoughts feel clearer and you start to feel more present in your life again. I always used to feel that I was like in this frosted glass bubble, like bathroom glass. So I was there, but not there. I'd be with people, but not quite with them. And I honestly didn't realize how much of that, well, that was all related to the restriction, to the malnutrition. And when you start to feel present in your life again, that you are there and you really are there, it's a beautiful turning point because it means your brain is healing. And with this new clarity, you can start to engage more deeply with the emotional and psychological aspects of recovery. Because to begin with, it's really hard to start to unpick any underlying issues that might have contributed to the eating disorder in the first place, whether that's trauma, perfectionism, a need for control. When your mental clarity is so restricted, your cognitive, like my brain's gone now. When your ability to process information is so limited in the deep restriction, it's really hard. But once you have started this emotional rehabilitation, you can start what I call phase 2 of recovery, which is the deeper emotional work. And it's here where working with a coach like me literally really comes into its own. So not only can I help you and support you through that initial nutritional rehabilitation, but as your brain heals, we can work together because you have the capacity to engage with new coping strategies, explore past wounds, really start to create lasting change and step into this beautiful, self-compassionate, self-loving, and free person that I know you really want to be. So that about wraps up today's episode. Restoring mental clarity through nutrition is like the foundation in recovery. And it does take time, patience, and trust. And you do have to start doing it scared. But as you continue to nourish yourself, you're not just healing your body, you're healing your mind too. The fog lifts, your thoughts clear. And with that clarity, you'll be able to engage in all the work that leads you to total freedom. So take things one bite at a time, one day at a time. And know, as I know, you are so worthy of total healing and freedom. Sending you all so much love, and take care of yourself. And I'll see you next week.